Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today, another unscripted review. Not even on my schedule, but screw it, it's my show. We're going to talk about it anyway. The newest movie in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, The Avengers: Infinity War. I don't know how you make this movie. Literally, I don't. I just got out of the movie. I saw the movie. I've been thinking about the movie, but I don't know how you can effectively make this movie or how it could have ever worked at all. And to place some of this in context, I'll freely admit I'm not a huge comic book person, and even when I am, I'm more of a DC guy than a Marvel guy, but I have read the original Infinity Gauntlet book. I've read the trade, I understand what happens in that book, and I'll give Jim Starlin credit for telling a fantastic story. It's one of the few event comics I genuinely like and I've gone back to. But it's also one of those stories that is almost a little bit too high concept for its own good. That's the thing whenever you deal with the Infinity Stones and the Infinity Gauntlet. You deal with such high abstract concepts that are so difficult to realize even on comic book panels that adapting it to the screen and then having it in some way being actually able to ground it in some level of drama, it's damn near impossible. And even with all the build up to this movie, even with the fact that they're trying to bring in Thanos, who is a complicated character in his own right. I knew they'd have to do some pretty significant reworking to make him work in this movie at all, and they do, but I don't know how you solve this movie. I don't know how this movie gets made. And as much as people are flooding to it and are absolutely shocked by how much they did in this movie, and I'll freely stress that when spoilers are coming, I will draw a firm line there because I'm not going to spoil the whole movie because, oh my god, the ending. But at the same time, this is the sort of movie that even if you had given this twice the budget and twice the runtime, I'm not sure you could have made this work. I'm not sure you could have. But then again, that's pretty true even about event comics in and of themselves. You're bringing together the entire universe of a collected world, and you're trying to get all of these characters interacting with each other. Maybe they only get a few minutes of screen time, and to still tell an emotionally compelling story, you need a locus and a focal point, and that you'll ultimately have the main characters driving a lot of that story. But at the end of the day, it's such a hard story, such a hard balance to capture, and even in the movies don't have the eons of history that have come with the Marvel comic book industry. And as much history as they've built up over the past 10 years, building into such a high concept story, being able to ground it and realize that you have all these characters to mesh it together to make something coherent and potent out of there and still hit that emotional watermark, that's damn near impossible. And that makes it a little bit difficult to judge this movie, because with the acknowledgement of the impossibility of telling this story, and I have to stress, impossibility. If you've gone back and you read Infinity Gauntlet, you know what I'm talking about here. But at the same time, I can think of ways this might have worked better. And I can think of reasons why I don't quite love this as much as I want to. Because yeah, it's a very good movie and the ending is a gut punch. But I'm not going to call it a great movie. I can't, in good conscience. And there's a few reasons why, and the reason I want to get out of the way first, and the one I honestly am not holding against this movie all that much, is that it does not work as a self-contained narrative at all. Like, you could say that about the Avengers. Like, they introduced all the characters. It was so well structured in terms of Joss Whedon being able to bring everything together. And even he stumbled with Age of Ultron, a movie that I will defend more than most. But in that case, like, you still had so many characters being able to balance so many different competing arcs going into this. And when you have a culmination as big as Infinity War, really the only way to consider it is in the lead up to all the other different films. A lot of emotional arcs coming to a head at this point. Here's the big problem. I don't mind that this is not a self-contained movie, but you need a focal point. And you need the emotional character arcs to land at that focal point. And the one thing this movie does unmistakably right is the main character being, of all people, Thanos. Because yeah, Thanos has been observed in the background of a lot of these Marvel movies, starting with the Avengers. And he's a hard character. If you know the comics at all, and there's a pretty big significant reworking from the comics, even then, to make him any way compelling, there needed to be some rework. And credit to when it's due, they actually pulled it off. The script actually gives Thanos a surprising amount of emotional depth. He's not just a two-dimensional villain, and he very easily could be. Now, is he in the same league as Killmonger or Loki? Well, I think he's up there, honestly. I think there's just so much weight and impact, and a lot of credit has to go to Josh Brolin underneath all of that, well, not really prosthetics, but underneath all that CGI to still deliver a layered and impactful performance. It's really quite stunning. I'll give him all the praise in the world for that, especially being able to act against some pretty big heavyweights in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I'll give him credit for that too. But at the same time, he's also the sort of character that you needed that space. And you needed all those parts to be getting in motion to get him to that space to build up to that final ending climax to what he does, what he has to do. Because we all know the purpose of the Infinity Gauntlet at this point. It's been spoiled in a lot of the trailers. You get all the Infinity Stones, and then with the snap of your fingers, half the life in the universe is gone, eradicated, erased. And really the only way you could do that, and the reasons why the Infinity Gauntlet is so damn powerful, is that it draws upon things like time travel and reality warping and being able to travel anywhere in the galaxy instantaneously. And the sheer amount of power it brings to the table is pretty insane. And as of all that, there's no, even back in the original Infinity Gauntlet storyline, being able to find somebody who can go up against the Mad Titan, somebody who can actually present a credible threat is insanely difficult. Because you can throw Galactus at him, but even that is not enough. And I'll be honest, even in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, you have heavyweights like Doctor Strange, for instance. But this is where you come into the other issue, is that if you're building up as a culmination of so many other different movies in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, you realize that certain heroes have to be there to present a credible threat to Thanos, but you're also realizing that they might not be the most interesting or potent characters, or their arcs just do not directly tie in as much to Thanos and have that same level of emotional weight. And really the biggest example here is Doctor Strange. Look, I like the original Doctor Strange movie, and I think a lot of the cinematics and a lot of how that movie is shot is absolutely stunning, but in terms of a character and his relationship to Thanos and how that develops and how quintessential, how much he's probably one of the few people who can go toe-to-toe with Thanos, you realize that, well, it's the emotional impact just isn't there in the same way that it is in, say, comparison with the Guardians of the Galaxy. Also, this is one thing I will say the movie does absolutely right, the integration of the Guardians throughout so much of this film, because really, if you're looking for an emotional nexus of this film, it comes with characters like Peter Quill and Drax and Gamora being able to confront somebody like Thanos, because there's actually stakes there for them. Really, the best parts of any of the emotional drama in this film come specifically with Gamora and Nebula, and oh my god, I want to spoil this, but I really can't. And at the same time, it pushes some buttons. It actually pays off some of the emotional arc that James Gunn established, especially in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Now, some of the plot mechanisms, that's one thing that you will have to realize with Infinity War, is that there is a lot of this movie that's just setting up the plot mechanisms to get everyone at the right points to fight Thanos at the right time. And a lot of that comes in with the Thor side of things with Ragnarok. You see some of it with Bruce Banner's character, although I'll just say this outright, I really don't like a lot of the stuff they did surrounding the Hulk in this movie. I thought it was a little bit cheap, but it also, when you have so much of the emotional weight tied up in the Guardians characters, and that's something that I can't appreciate, then you have to integrate a bunch of other characters, and it's really reliant upon how much you liked their movies and their supporting arcs that you realize any sort of the emotional impact when it comes around to the ending. Like, if you love Black Panther, this movie's gonna break your heart. If you love Spider-Man, this movie's gonna really, really break your heart. If you love Iron Man, oh god, I feel for Tony Stark in this movie. I really genuinely do, because again, he's probably has the most completed character arc stretching all the way back to the first Iron Man movie and now to this point. And while this movie, you can tell there is mechanisms to bring his emotional arc in line when he has his confrontation with Thanos, could have used a little more, honestly. This is one of those films that could have easily used another hour, and I would have been fine with it at least. But that's part of the problem. You have certain characters for where the emotional arc is so much stronger going into fight with Thanos, and yet they're not always the ones given the most screen time. And that's where it comes to being a bit of a balancing act. You can clearly tell at some level level, given how insanely popular that Black Panther turned out to be. And while there was always going to be something held in Wakanda, you can tell there may have been a little bit more emphasis bringing everything back there. But let's be real here. If you're looking for certain characters to really monopolize a lot of that screen time and setting, and really provide the matchups with Thanos you're looking for, I'm not sure Doctor Strange, as much as he is a heavy hitter in the comics, and he might be one of the few people to go toe-to-toe with Thanos, does anyone want to see him go and fight Thanos more than Captain America? Or even Thor, or Tony Stark Iron Man, or like even some of the Guardians characters. That's where there was the most emotional impact for me. It seems like the screenplay didn't always take that into consideration when it came to screen time. So because there was so much they had to cram on screen to begin with. And on top of that, look, the cinematic display, the special effects are insanely potent. I'm not denying that a metric ton of money went into this. And I'll admit Marvel was pretty damn ballsy for the ending of this movie. What they chose to do, it has been a while since I've seen a film engage in such downbeat, bleak storytelling since probably Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1. And if you've seen the end of that movie, you know exactly the sort of emotional weight that comes out of this film. On the one hand, I kind of respect that, because only in the age of serialized storytelling like you would get in the MCU could you ever get away with this. But it's getting away with it. And I think this movie could have hit way harder if some of the losses, some of the hit characters that had more of the screen time, had a little bit more weight and investment coming in from the audience. Because Marvel has to know which characters are we most invested in beyond just the architecture of the narrative that's saying that they are heavy hitters and they have to be the ones fighting against Thanos. They got there with part of them. They got there with a pretty significant chunk of them, but they didn't get there with all of them. And I think the ending was ballsy. Again, I stress the audacity of this movie, but the emotional impact is mixed for me. Especially when it comes to the ending, which I'm not going to spoil, even though I kind of really have to, but I'm not going to spoil what happens in the ending. But I will say this. I will say that if Marvel was looking to really clear the board, as they kind of have to do at some point, because eventually these actors' contracts will run out, they could have done it in a different way, and I think I probably would have appreciated it a little bit more, or at least it would have hit so much harder, just in terms of both emotional stakes and the stakes of the broader universe at large. And here's where we have to talk about stakes with regards to one thing in the Infinity Gauntlet storyline that was unavoidable. Since this is not a self-contained narrative, and since that entirely piece has gone out the window, and as much as I'm okay with that, Infinity Gauntlet kind of had to be. In terms of the original event comic surrounding the Infinity Gauntlet, it kinda had to be self-contained because of the infinite power on display. And as much as when you leave this movie, you have that feeling that nothing will ever be the same, and it's rewarding the comic book fans for recognizing that. The diehard comic book fans will also know the time gem is in the Infinity Gauntlet, and if you remember how Infinity Gauntlet ended, you know just the power that can come out of that specific moment. There's even points where the time gem's power is referenced in the movie, and it pays off, but it also pays off in a way where you think about a year or so down the line, and you get into an idea of where this is ultimately going to be coming in the sequel. And again, this is probably one of those movies that will work better when we have the full completed picture, but at the same time, it undercuts some of the emotional impact, even that this individual film is trying to have. It gets us invested in the emotional arcs because these are characters we care about. But the film in and of itself, in terms of its structure, doesn't really earn it. And that's what bugs me. That is the reason why, on its own, it doesn't get there. And I wanted it to. My God, I did. It's a beautiful movie. The cast is insanely strong. There are certain characters I wish they focused on more that are my personal favorites. I would love to see more Captain America, more actively involved. I would have loved to see more Tony Stark. I would have loved to see, as much as they had of the Guardians, I could have easily taken more. But at the same time, that's the peril with the Infinity Gauntlet storyline, because I don't know how you could have told this. I don't know how you could have gone beyond this and actually paid it off in a way that satisfies the mechanics of the universe while satisfying the emotional connection we had to the characters. Because emotional connection is measured in a way that doesn't always compete with power levels. If anything, it might operate in cross purposes, because sometimes it's the underdogs we cheer for the most, and they often might have the weakest power sets of all. And you know what? I could go on. I really don't want to spoil this movie, and you're all going to see it, so you guys go have fun with this. But as a film in and of itself, as much as I want to love this film, and as much as there is emotional stakes that I'll give to Thanos, and I'll give to the Guardians, I'll even give some to Tony Stark, and there's a whole subsection with Vision and the Scarlet Witch that, look, I appreciate how hard the Marvel movies are trying to get us to care about those two characters, but I just don't. But at the end of the day, I'm giving this a strong 7 out of 10, and I can only recommend it if you're a fan and you have seen everything else coming in. Because, and even then, I'd say it's more of a fan of, if you're a fan of certain characters, this movie will pay off what you want. If you're a fan of others, it won't. The only emotional arcs I think really pay off effectively are Guardians, and a lot of points to Chris Pratt for doing a lot of heavy lifting there, as well as Zoe Saldana. But at the same time, it's the Guardians and Thanos. That is what this movie had to be, and it got there. But again, it's only recommended if that's where your focal point is. If you're going in otherwise, I can predict a lot of you are going to be not disappointed, but a little unsatisfied. It might be the breaking point when it comes to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because sometimes when you throw everything, including the kitchen sink, at this, and you don't always pay it all off in ways that the broader consciousness can actively accept, and you kind of have to do that when you have a larger self-contained universe. The universe is no longer self-contained. That has to become a factor now. It's hard. I wish I liked it more. But as it is, well,